Good afternoon, everyone. Imagine this. You just graduated high school. You graduated with honors, even. You remembered every piece of quadratic formula. You aced all of your finals in algebra. You feel like you finally made it. You even secured a scholarship. You get to college and you start filling out your forms for your first real job. You need an apartment. You need to get a lease for your car. And you're looking at all of these things like they're written in Chinese. And then tax time comes around and people are asking you how you're filing, and you just see math symbols floating everywhere, right? But there's no lack of intelligence. So this isn't a problem of you being stupid. You know that you know the things and you feel like you're a pretty smart person. But why weren't you taught these essential skills to help you progress from high school into adulthood? Well, that's the question that I feel like a lot of people are having in today's society, and why so many people are starting to call for reform in public school. Now, I don't want to come off like I'm bashing public schools. By no means. I think that they're an amazing asset, but I do think that our government could be using it in a better way. And so, one of the first things I want to focus on is the fact that, these practical skills like home economics, sewing, cooking, budgeting, your money, all of those things used to be taught in schools. Okay, those are things that recently have been removed, but even back in the 50s, I'm sure you could ask your grandparents. People were learning those things still because they're pertinent to society. You need to know how to take care of yourself once you leave your parents' home, but so many of us aren't taught that. And so a lot of these life skills aren't being developed from a young age. And then people are, Ubering food every night. They're spending all of their financial aid money on DoorDash. Okay. And then at the end of the semester, they're wondering how they don't have any meal plan dollars left. Well, the problem is that they weren't taught financial literacy and they weren't taught practical skills. And so part of the reason why schools are designed the way that they're designed, not so much the curriculum, but just the schedule and the routine of the day, is because there was a reform around the age of industry when America was in a time where everybody had to work in the factories, right? So there were kids, there were parents, the whole family had to work or be doing something because the parents definitely had to be working in the factories. And so they made the school system look a lot like the factory work because they needed not only those kids to be used to that system once they grew up and got to the point where they needed to work in the factories, they wanted these kids to be used to that routine, right? That makes sense. But the problem was that a lot of these parents, like I said, they were out of the home, and so they needed their kids to have a place to go while they were at work during the day. And so now you see a schedule where kids, the first thing when the sun comes up, they're getting on the bus and they're going to school. And there's good reason for starting your day early. I'm not saying that you shouldn't start your day early, but the only reason why school starts so early is, like I said, because they were really trying to get these kids used to this factory system. So they get there early and then they have a bell system. They hear a bell and they know, okay, this is my 10-minute break. And then they go to their 30-minute lunch, and then they hear another bell and they get another 10-minute break. And that is very much structured to how our jobs in modern society work, right? But the problem is that now there's a disconnect because the workplace has evolved. And now our day isn't just from 7 a.m. until 2 p.m. It's not. Most of the time, parents are working 9 to 5. And so now you have 2 hours before and after school where parents are having to figure out, well, what do I do with my kids? What do I do? And there's such a lack of community now that a lot of people don't have anyone to lean on. And so the entire reason that this school system was created to be the way that it isn't even working anymore. And then, those two problems put together, the fact that practical skills aren't being taught in schools, and on top of it, you have this other problem of, the school schedule not even working for parents. brings in the issue of, okay, well, if the parents are working all day and they're not getting a lot of time with their students, when are they teaching them financial literacy? So financial literacy is one of those things that have been commonly known in the public school system as like a silent teaching, right? So teachers very much expect parents to be teaching that at home, which if you're a parent, of course, it's your responsibility to set your kids up for a good future, but not every kid has good parents, and that's just the reality. And so you're expecting parents to teach these kids something that they might not even know themselves. And that's the glory of public school, right? To have people with an education to tell you things that you don't know. But that part is being missed in our public schools. And so what's going on is these students are, like I said in the beginning, they're graduating and they're immediately getting in debt. They immediately don't know how to file taxes. They don't know what a credit score is. They don't know what affects their credit in a good way or a bad way. They don't know the difference between good credit and bad credit. They don't know the difference between an I-9 and a W-2. And it's causing people for decades to be in debt, to take out credit cards that they would have never taken out, by the time they're 25. And it's setting our next generation up to live in a society that runs completely on debt. And that's exhausting, right? Everybody likes to keep the money that they get paid. And so because these skills aren't being taught, there's also another problem coming into play. There have been employers that have been reporting that the reason they're not hiring new graduates is because they don't have good public speaking skills, right? So they're not being taught how to communicate with people one-on-one. They're not being taught how to send a professional email. They're not being taught how to be adults with etiquette in the workplace, and that's making employers shy away. But because these kids have now accumulated so much debt because they just don't know, they need a job as soon as they graduate, but those skills weren't taught, and so they're not getting hired. And so I really believe that all three of those issues really tie into one another. And I don't think that this is something that can happen, that can change overnight, but I do think that this is a systematic problem that everybody's feeling. Even with all of the talk now about, financial aid deferment and how hard that's going to hit people, especially those who have grad loans, right? So I think that there's so many good things that can be done within the public school system. But I think that we have to make sure that we are teaching our young people to grow up and be the next members of society. We have to make sure that we're giving them the skills to grow up and be the best versions of themselves, because like I said, not everybody has a healthy home. Not everybody has parents that care to teach them these things. And that is why public school is a gift, because it evens the playing field for people and it gives people the opportunity to have a life that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. And so I know that these things are systematic problems that are going to take a lot of time and money to fix, but I know that it's something that society has been yearning for. And I know that by including these things in the school system, kids can grow up to not have financial illiteracy, and they can go to college confident and come out of it not in debt, but maybe even saving money, maybe even coming up with a process for themselves to get the things they want without having to go into crippling debt. And they wouldn't have to rely on all of these third-party services because they would know how to be self-sufficient. So thank you all so much for listening to my speech today, and I hope that you all have gleaned a little bit of wisdom from it, and I hope that we're able to, as a society, move forward to better systems that are going to help our children progress in society the way that we need them to and the way that they need to for themselves.